Chapter 121. The watch on the sundering canyons was a lesson in paranoia. For 48 hours. Nothing happened. The canyons bloomed. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the stone. And the air grew so clean it was almost sharp. It was a resounding success. And that in itself was terrifying. Dorian monitored the sensor feeds from his lab. His face lit by the glow of a dozen screens. The fortification is holding. The area stability is now rated A rank. It's a paradise. He shook his head. A very, very obvious paradise. On the third day, the first ripple appeared. Not a sovereign, not an army, but a single figure. It appeared at the canyon's edge at dawn. A silhouette against the rising sun. The sensors registered no mana signature, no life signs. It was just a void. It's an echo. Kaelen said, watching the feed from the safehouse. His reflective insight, even through the video, picked up the telltale signs of mnemonic compression. The curators sent a curator. The figure was the sage from the conservatory. It stood for an hour, perfectly still, observing the transformed landscape. Then, it simply knelt, placed a small, crystalline marker on the ground, and vanished. Dorian enhanced the image of the marker. It was a simple, elegant plaque, etched with a single symbol, an open hand cradling a star, the curator's sigil. Dorian murmured, "He's not claiming it. He's cataloguing it, acknowledging the addition to the exhibit of the world. He knows it was a planted seed, but he's appreciating the result anyway." It was an unnervingly civilized response. There was no anger, no attempt to reclaim the seed. Just documentation. The trap had been sprung, and the predator had left a thank you note. Chapter 122. The anticlimax was more disturbing than an attack. The curator's passive response meant he was even more patient and calculating than they had feared. He was playing a different game entirely, on a timescale they couldn't comprehend. This left Obsidian Star in a strange new position. They were now the undisputed experts in anomalous phenomena resolution. The successful public stabilization of the sundering canyons, officially credited to a joint research initiative with the Crimson Howl, solidified their reputation. The contracts that came in now were weirder, more complex. A factory where the machines were producing perfectly functional, but emotionally resonant objects. A neighborhood where reflections were developing a 2-second delay. These were system glitches, not phantom infestations. Kaelen became their primary operative for these missions. His reflective insight was the only tool that could reliably diagnose the problem, and his domain was the only safe way to contain it while a fix was applied. These fixes were rarely violent. They were more like recalibrations, subtle nudges to the local reality to correct the error. He was no longer just a fighter or a commander. He was a technician for the universe. The work was exhausting, mentally taxing, but deeply satisfying. With every glitch he fixed, he felt the Veil fortification stat in his interface tick up by a minuscule, almost immeasurable amount. 0.101%, 0.102%. He was healing the world, one bug at a time. Chapter 123. It was during one of these glitch hunts, a park where gravity was intermittently reversing for small objects, that Kaelen felt it. A presence. Not a glitch. Not a phantom. But a consciousness. Observing him with intense, focused interest. He finished the recalibration. A simple matter of resyncing the local gravitational constant to the universal baseline. And stood still, extending his senses. There, in the shadow of an oak tree, a man was leaning against the trunk. He was dressed in modern, casual clothes, but they looked like a costume on him. His posture was too still, his eyes too old. He held a small, leather-bound book and was idly sketching in it. He looked up and met Kaelen's gaze. He smiled, a friendly, disarming expression that didn't reach his cold, grey eyes. Fascinating technique. The man said, his voice pleasant, "You don't force the correction. You persuade reality to remember itself." Elegant. Kaelen's hand twitched, ready to summon his blade. "Who are you?" a fellow student of the world's little errors. The man said, closing his book, "You can call me Alistair. I've been watching your work. It's very impressive for one so new." Alistair took a step forward, and Kaelen felt it, a pressure similar to a sovereign's, but contained, refined. This was no echo. This was the real thing. "You're a sovereign," Kaelen stated, his voice flat. Alistair's smile widened. "Such a crude term. I prefer independent researcher. The others are so brutish, don't you think? All smashing and grabbing. I'm more interested in the underlying principles." His eyes scanned Kaelen up and down. "And you, my boy, are a walking violation of several core principles. I'd very much like to study you." The threat was polite, but absolute. Chapter 124. Kaelen didn't run. He stood his ground. His domain a hair's trigger away. "I'm not an experiment." "Everything is an experiment," Alistair replied smoothly. "The universe is one grand laboratory. Your very existence is a hypothesis being tested." He tapped his book. "The question is, what is the dependent variable? Your strength? Your morality? Or simply, how long you can last?" He took another step, and the air around them grew heavy. The sounds of the city faded. "The Curator wants to put you under glass. The others want to break you and see what makes you tick. I just want to take notes. It's much less messy." Kaelen's reflective insight screamed at him. Alistair's form was a lie. Beneath the pleasant human shell was a complex, terrifying structure of interlocking concepts and logical predicates. He was a living theorem, and his power was deduction. He could argue a man out of existence. "This is my only warning," Alistair said, his tone still conversational. "Stop fixing the glitches. You're interfering with my data collection. Continue, and I will be forced to consider you a contaminant in my study. And contaminants are removed." He gave a final, polite nod, turned, and walked away. After 3 steps, he simply wasn't there anymore. The city sounds rushed back in. Kaelen stood alone in the park, his heart hammering. He had just been served an eviction notice by a scientist who saw the world as his petri dish. Chapter 125. The meeting with Alistair changed the calculus entirely. They were no longer just hiding from the association and dodging the Curator. They had actively attracted the attention of a third sovereign, one whose motives were inscrutable and whose methods were potentially the most dangerous of all. "He's a theorist," Dorian said, his face pale after hearing Kaelen's report. "Alistair, I've heard whispers. He doesn't seek power or collection. He seeks understanding. He sets up scenarios, like these glitches, and observes the outcomes. You fixing them is ruining his experiments. So we're supposed to let people lose their memories and fall victim to reality errors so he can take notes," Jack said, disgusted. "According to his ethics, yes," Dorian replied. "He is the ultimate neutral observer. And you, Kaelen, have become an active variable. He can't predict you. That makes you either the most interesting subject he's ever found, or a flaw in his research that needs to be eliminated." The path was clear and impossible. If they continued their work, Alistair would move against them. If they stopped, people would suffer, and the veil would continue to decay. "There's no winning here," Lyra stated, summing up everyone's thoughts. "Then we don't play his game," Kaelen said, a cold resolve settling over him. "We don't just fix the glitches he creates. We find his lab. We ruin his research. We make him the variable." It was a declaration of war against a concept, a war against the observer. Chapter 126. Finding Alistair's lab was a task that made the archive heist look simple. He didn't have a fixed location. His lab was the city itself. The glitches his ongoing experiments. Kaelen's new goal was to not just fix the errors, but to trace them back to their source. He used his reflective insight like a forensic tool, analyzing the signature of each glitch, looking for the unique logical fingerprint of Alistair's interference. It was painstaking work. Most glitches were natural, Random errors. But a few had a certain elegance to them. A specific, cruel curiosity behind their design. A glitch that made people see their deepest fear for exactly 3 seconds. Another that swapped the senses of taste and touch in a single city block. These were Alistair's work, and each one contained a tiny, hidden data packet, a callback signal reporting the results back to the source. Kaelen, with Dorian's help, learned to intercept that signal. They couldn't decode the complex data, but they could trace the path it took through the layers of reality. It was like following a single strand of spiderweb through a forest. It led them not to a place, but to a person. The signals all converged on a single, unassuming individual, a mid-level manager at the Hunters Association's logistics division, a man named Leo. Alistair wasn't hiding in a pocket dimension. He was hiding in plain sight, using a perfectly normal human as a living server and relay for his research data. Chapter 127. Confronting Leo was a delicate operation. They couldn't just attack him. He was likely an unwitting pawn, and alerting Alistair was a guaranteed death sentence. They observed him. Leo was bland, forgettable, did his job with quiet efficiency, and went home to a small, tidy apartment every night. He showed no signs of being mind-controlled or possessed. Kaelen, using his reflective insight from a distance, saw the truth. Leo's mind wasn't being controlled. It was being *used star. Thin, almost invisible filaments of conceptual energy were plugged into his consciousness, siphoning his sensory data and using his brain's processing power to run Alistair's experiments in the background. Leo probably just thought he had a good imagination and occasional migraines. He's a terminal. Dorian confirmed. A wireless access point. Alistair is using him to interface with the city without being physically present. It's brilliant. And horrifying. To get to Alistair, they had to go through Leo. But how do you fight a signal? We don't fight it. Kaelen said. An idea forming. We hijack it. Dorian's eyes lit up. A man-in-the-middle attack. We intercept the connection and feed him false data. We make him see what we want him to see. Kaelen nodded. We create our own experiment, one where the result is his own exposure. The plan was audacious. They would use the Sovereign of Observation's own tools against him. Chapter 128. The operation required perfect timing. Dorian built a device, a complex manifold generator disguised as a common city utility box, and had Jax install it near Leo's apartment building. Its function was to create a localized information bubble, allowing them to spoof the data Leo was sending. Kaelen's job was to provide the false data. He had to create a convincing, fictional glitch for Alistair to observe. He chose a public square, using his domain and his refined control over the Warden's blade. He didn't fix reality. He subtly bent it. He created a harmless, but statistically impossible, event. For 1 hour, every pigeon in the square would fly in a perfect, synchronized fractal pattern. It was bizarre, noticeable, but caused no harm. The perfect kind of anomaly to pique a researcher's interest. The trap was set. The spoofing device was activated. Leo, sitting at his desk at the association, would observe the pigeon phenomenon through his psychic link, and the data would be sent to Alistair. Now, they waited for the observer to observe the bait. Chapter 129. Alistair's reaction was faster than expected. Within minutes of the glitch beginning, he appeared in the square. He looked fascinated. He ignored the staring civilians and the synchronized pigeons, his gaze fixed on the underlying mana patterns. He pulled out his book and began sketching furiously. This is new, he muttered to himself, his voice carrying to Kaelen's enhanced senses. Spontaneous emergence of complex order from a chaotic system. The probability is incalculable. This shouldn't be happening. He was hooked. He spent the full hour observing, completely absorbed in the data. He never once suspected it was a fabrication. When the hour ended and the pigeons returned to their normal, chaotic flight, Alistair looked up, a triumphant gleam in his eye. He had gotten his result. And then he froze. His head tilted. He looked directly at the utility box containing Dorian's spoofing device. A frown marred his pleasant features. The signal. There's an echo. A redundancy. His eyes narrowed, and his gaze swept the square, passing over Kaelen's hidden position without stopping. But the intensity of his focus was like a physical blow. He had noticed the interference. The trap had worked a little too well. They hadn't just given him false data. They had shown him that his data stream could be compromised. Alistair's expression shifted from curiosity to cold. Clinical anger. He closed his book with a snap. The experiment is contaminated, he said, his voice losing all its pleasantry, becoming flat and metallic. The variable has become self-aware. Time for a reset. He vanished. The first part of their plan had succeeded. They had confirmed his methods and drawn him out. The second part, surviving his response, was about to begin. Chapter 130. The retaliation was not a direct attack. It was a statement. The following morning, Leo, the mid-level manager, was found in his apartment. He was physically fine, but his mind was gone. Not erased, but formatted. He was a blank slate. He could breathe, eat, and walk, but he had no memories, no personality, no sense of self. He was a living shell. Attached to his chest was a single, typewritten note. Subject compromised. Data integrity lost. Source of contamination. Obsidian Star. Hypothesis. Active hostile variable. New experiment. Stress testing variables resilience. Commencing now. Alistair had not only discovered their interference, he had identified them, and he had euthanized his own test subject to send a message. He was no longer an observer. He was a lab director, and he had just designated them the primary focus of his next, and most dangerous, study. The safe house no longer felt safe. Every shadow seemed to hold his cold, grey eyes. Every unexpected sound could be the start of his stress test. They had wanted to go on the offensive. They had succeeded. And in doing so, they had unleashed a quiet, intelligent, and utterly ruthless enemy who knew how they worked and was now dedicated to taking them apart, piece by piece, all in the name of science. The war for the Veil had just entered a new, more terrifying phase.